The day that I got injured, it seemed like it was just a normal day.
Shilo was hurt on the 19th of February, 2007, was a Monday.
We was out there running a pretty routine patrol. We'd been called to investigate a possible IED in the area.
I just backed out of my parking space and my cell phone rang, and it was our rear detachment commander.
The initial blast was right behind the driver's seat. I mean, it blew the frame and everything out, blew the top of the truck off, blew the back hatch off of the truck. And I mean, it was a terrible situation, terrible IED.
And I knew immediately, when he introduced himself, who he was at that time of the morning. I just pulled back in my parking space and parked the car, and I asked him, how bad is Shilo?
I was hot, and I knew I had to get out of the truck. I could feel the fire, and I knew I had to get out of the truck.
He just knew that Shilo had been burned, and the information he got was that approximately 1/3 of Shilo's body had been burned. He did tell me that there was one other injury in the vehicle and then 3 casualties. So I knew then it was a pretty significant blast that had taken out Shilo's truck.
The crew chief, the guy that's in the back of the medevac helicopter, and he's telling me, hang in there, you're going to be okay. And in my mind, I'm still in combat mode. I'm like, I know, I'm like, I'm fine. I had no idea. I had no idea. I kept asking where my soldiers were because I could hear my driver. I could hear Adam, and I was asking him, where's my soldiers? Why aren't they on the helicopter? I asked the doctor one last time. I said, you know where my soldiers are? And he looked at me and he said, you'll find out in a couple of months. And that's when I was induced into a coma.
Thursday morning at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call. Your flight leaves at 5 this afternoon for Landstuhl. You need to be ready to go and be at the Syracuse airport. A couple of hours before that, Shilo's teenage son was living with us, and our daughter, who was 3, I didn't have any plans of what to do with them. We hadn't prepared for that. As a spouse, it's stress to you. Your husband can be killed, but they don't stress so much, make a family plan for an incident like what we've been through. I flew to Germany Thursday. I got there Friday morning. As a spouse, they tell you if you go to Landstuhl, it's probably because the worst case scenario. I made that flight wondering if my husband would come back. I got there. There was some confusion on when I was coming, so there was nobody at the airport to pick me up. I waited at the USO for a couple of hours for a ride to Landstuhl. Finally, get somebody to take me to the hospital. I was met by our 10th Mountain liaison at the Fisher House there, who sat down and started describing to me what I would see when I walked into Shilo's room. There's no words that can ever describe and paint a picture for you to be ready to see what you're going to see walking into a room like that. Saturday night, Shilo wasn't having neurological responses when we were still at Landstuhl. When they were testing his pupils, they weren't moving with the light, and they were afraid he may have had some brain damage or may even be brain dead. They decided to stop the pain medication and the medication keeping him induced into his coma to see how his body reacted to everything. It took approximately 4 hours for all of this medication to leave his system. And I remember being nose to nose with him, and when we made eye contact, I honestly think that if you could ever picture what hell looks like, that's what it was in Shilo's eyes.
Listening to Kathreyn tell me the timeline of the way things happened, it seems like I could kind of relate that with my dreams. Like she used to say, we're in Germany, you're at Landstuhl and stuff like that. Well, I didn't necessarily know that I was in Germany, but I knew I was in Europe. In my dream, I was in Europe. I knew that I was in Europe. And I knew that Kathreyn, I could hear her voice, but I couldn't touch her. And it was like I could even see her in my coma, but I could never reach her. She was always just out of my reach. And it was really frustrating. there was days that it was probably days when I was in extreme pain. It felt like I was in a room full of fiberglass, and everything was just poking my skin. And it was like I was weightless, just in this fiberglass, just burning. And I mean, these dreams were just so vivid.
When we left Launchstool, we got in a C-17 and flew back to the States. It was Shilo and 2 other patients on the flight. He was the most seriously injured. This whole time he's medically induced in a coma. I rode the ambulance from San Antonio Airport to BAMC. I was sitting in the front seat. I had 2 suitcases in my lap because there's not much room in the front seat of an ambulance. I remember arriving at BAMC, going through the emergency room, up the elevator to the 4th floor to the burn unit, and somebody told me, there's a waiting room. Somebody will be with you in a couple of hours. That was before we had the WTB, before you had an NCO to meet you as a family at the airport, before we had any of that stuff established. I was sitting in the waiting room by myself at midnight, waiting for someone to come tell me what was going on with Shilo. Shilo was in the ICU there for approximately 45 days. In that time, he went through 4 major graft surgeries. He had an arterial bleed one night. They pretty much replaced his blood. He went into acute renal failure twice and was on a machine called continual renal replacement therapy, or CRRT. He was on a week both times. 3 to 4% of the people that put on that survive. So for him to have been on it twice and made it is a miracle in itself. Once he left the ICU, he went to 4 East, which is the step-down ward. He was in there for 17 days. While he was in that ward, I shadowed the nurses to learn how to take care of his wounds. I watched them, as they did stuff with him, but for a week I came in the mornings when they actually bathed him and did the full wound care. And it took, when he got out of the hospital, it took me on average 4 to 6 hours a day to do his wound care. He could not feed himself. He couldn't do anything for himself. He couldn't even bend his arm to touch his nose.
Probably the worst day was when they came in and I was stuck to the bed. And I know that it probably happened, fairly often because my stomach, chest, and my back was all exposed, where they had taken the donor sites off. So, I stuck to everything. The shirts, the sheets, the pillow, my head stuck to the pillow. It was terrible. But they came in and they're peeling that off of me. And it felt like they were skinning me alive. It really did. I was screaming and they was like, "You don't really feel that, do you?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" It was just, I couldn't believe that they were saying that. And it was just like, just ripping it off. And anyway, that I actually have nightmares about that.
When we did the wound care, it consisted of putting him in the bathtub and soaking the bandages off, cleaning him, and then reapplying all the bandages. That was usually a very, very painful process for him. So we would, give him the most pain medication we could in about a half hour before we started, so it would be kicked in and then still be working at the end of the process. So that was pretty hard. I had to be able to separate myself from his pain and not let it get to me. So I still have problems with that now. When our daughter gets hurt or the boys, I have trouble being affectionate when they're hurt because I couldn't for Shilo. I had to learn not to be soft-hearted, I guess. Still at this point, we didn't have the kids with us. I didn't have time to be a mom, a wife, and a caregiver. There wasn't enough of me to go around for everybody. Elizabeth was still with our family here in Texas. They would bring her to visit back and forth, but she couldn't stay because of the wound care and everything. I couldn't take care of a 3-year-old and Shilo both.
But Elizabeth has lived this from day one. She's lived it from day one and experienced me coming and going out of surgeries. She's seen the before and afters. She's had to see me at my worst. She's seen me on my better days. And it's been really trying for her.
The first time Elizabeth saw Shilo, at first she hid behind me and kind of looked around. She was scared to go up to him. She didn't want to hurt him. Well, then we got her to sit in his lap, and she was okay with that. Well, then when she realized that she could give him or hold his drinks for him, that became her job. When she was around, nobody touched a drink. It was Lizzie's job. So that made her feel very important and gave her a purpose in his recovery. So that was her big thing.
With all of the children, Kathreyn and I have to take special attention and special time sometimes to make sure that we're addressing the children's needs. But a lot of people take for granted that the kids are just flexible. Oh, well, they don't understand. They don't know. Well, the kids do know. They know something ain't right. You know, they definitely know something's going on. They may not know the questions to ask. They may not know how to say certain things. They may not know how to express themselves when they're scared, angry, or otherwise in this particular situation. So Kathreyn and I, it was like one day, it was just like a revelation, you know. We're like, well, Elizabeth, what do you think? You know, and you'd be surprised at the answers sometimes.
If there's kids around, kind of get to know the kids. See if there's something the kids need, because that was something early on for us. That was there wasn't a lot of questions. How is your kids doing? It was all focused on Shilo and I, and it made a significant impact in us. If somebody asked, "How are the kids? Do your kids need anything?"
My driver, Adam, actually came to see me. I was in the hospital room, and he came in. Of course, he was beside himself. You know, he was upset, blaming himself. Probably had been blaming himself the whole time. I told Adam, it's not your fault. You know, we all knew the risks. We was all doing our job. We was doing the right thing. And that's one of the things that helps me sleep at night, is knowing that I led my soldiers the best I could.
And Shilo's kind of joking with him, you know, hey, you know, one of these days the 5 of us will sit down and have a beer and look back and just kind of laugh about this and move on with life. And Adam looked at me because he knew we had talked about it. He knew Shilo didn't know yet.
And then I knew something was wrong. You know, I knew that somebody, one of them probably didn't make it. Well, we did our salutations. He left. And then Kathreyn was like, well, I got something to tell you. And I said, I kind of figured you did. And she said, you and Adam were the only 2 that survived.
Maybe the whole experience that we've had, that was the lowest point for Shilo, was knowing that those 3 men had been killed. And he carries a lot of guilt for that around with him. That
was probably the worst time of my life. I cried for 3 days until I had nothing left. And, excuse me. Anyway, after that, you know, I knew that I had to start dealing with it. You know, I knew that I couldn't just cry about it all the time, you know. So I kind of picked myself up, you know, and decided to move on. But it was every day I saw him, every day I thought about him.
I remember one day before he had learned to feed himself, we were sitting there and we were both, you know, neither one of us had expected to be in the position we were in. I'd never expected to take care of my husband, and he never expected to be a 33 or 34-year-old man that couldn't do anything for himself. So we were sitting there at the table one day, and he was just cranky and hateful, and I was done with the cranky and hateful.
And I'm lashing out at her, you know, just because that's all I can do. You know, I mean, just talk. So I was hateful. And she just looked at me and she said, I don't deserve that. She grabbed her plate, grabbed her drink, and left the room.
I left his plate on the table with his glass just where he couldn't reach the straw. And I grabbed my stuff and I got up and walked out of the room. And I left him sitting there with his food. And it was probably one of the hardest things I ever did because I knew he was hungry and I knew he needed to eat, but I couldn't take it. I needed him to stop taking it out on me.
And I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't even get a drink. And she didn't come back in for a little while. And, and that was one of those points where I was like, oh, duh, she's really trying to help me,
That was a turning point for us in his recovery as a couple because he realized, that he had been taking so much out on me. And we started talking more because up to that, he didn't talk a lot about what was going on. He didn't talk about his feelings or his thoughts or his fears.
The mental aspect that I had to deal with it was definitely the hardest. You start having depression. You start questioning, what am I going to be able to do? I was having to overcome that I lost 3 soldiers. I was having to overcome that I was disfigured. I had to overcome all the surgeries that I was going through, lack of sleep, the medications that I was on. I was pressured with the kids, pressured with the wife, pressured with, recovering from the guilt and everything of me being a survivor while I lost friends, me being guilty because I had friends that was deployed and I got to come home. There was just so many things to contend with, it seems like. I started seeing counselors there at Brooke Army Medical Center, and that helped a bunch. The chaplains, I started getting more involved with the chaplains, being able to talk to chaplains courses and stuff like that. That helped me because not only was it I could be able to talk to the chaplains, but I could tell my story to the chaplains and help chaplains address family members and service members.
I know that us talking about what we've been through has helped us tremendously to be where we are today. I know not everybody has that personality, and I respect that. But don't be afraid to talk to somebody about it, because I know that's been a big healing process for Shilo and I.
I actually feel like I kind of trained some of the squad leaders, in what they were doing. And I don't know, the biggest thing that I told them was just be understanding. You have to know your soldier. I had a girl call me one time, and I know what she did is they probably gave her a folder. They said, this is your soldier, and it was Staff Sergeant Shilo Harris, whatever.
And she called one day and started yelling at me, thinking I was Sergeant Harris because I was answering Shilo's phone number, and I wasn't making formation. And she was chewing me out for it. So I told Shilo about it.
She didn't even be talking to anybody like that, much less my wife. She dang sure didn't even be talking to me like that. It was unprofessional. So I went in there and I asked the platoon sergeant, I said, hey, where's the, Sergeant, what's her name? And he said, I think she's trying to hide from you. And so we got her. And the first thing she did was just come up and was like, I'm so sorry. I apologize. And I was like, just stop. I said, now you know me. And we sat down and we talked and we had a good conversation. And I told her, I was like, if you need me, you can call, talk to my wife. I said, I can't talk on the phone. I said, she'll try to give you updates, whatever you need. I was like, but please don't call being all huffy and hateful. I said, we've got plenty to do. And every day I was up at the hospital. And there was times that it felt like we would never be done. We'd get there sometimes at 6:30, 7 o'clock for physical therapy. Then we'd have this appointment, then that appointment, then lunch, and then that appointment, and then that appointment. We'd be done about 4:30. And I mean, that was a full day. And I'd just be exhausted. I'm hobbling around, and I'm wrapped in head to toe in bandages. So I kind of had my plate full too, and that's what I told her. So know your soldier, know who you're dealing with, especially before you jump down somebody's throat.
When you're assigned a new soldier, make sure you understand what's going on with that soldier before you ever make contact with them. They're not just a name in a folder. It's not just, Shilo Harris and his wife is Kathreyn and they have 5 children. Understand that Shilo Harris is a burn patient. He cannot hear. He, at this point early on, couldn't talk on the phone. Know those things before you jump to conclusions with that family.
That's something that Kathreyn and I usually try to tell everybody is when you're addressing these soldiers, take into consideration if they've got somebody there with them, like their spouse or their mother, sister, aunt, whoever's going to be there, is this person taking care of them? When I first got out of the hospital, I was on medications. I couldn't hear real well. I couldn't drive. Kathreyn, she had to do everything for me there again. So people wouldn't even talk to her sometimes. They'd be talking to me because I'm a service member, and I wouldn't even be able to hear them. I'd be sitting there trying to read their lips, and this is before I got my hearing aids. And I'd just be like, talk to her, because I have no idea what you're saying, and I'm sorry.
I'm in charge of getting him his medication. I'm in charge of getting him to his appointments. If you're going to schedule something with him, I need to know it too, because I'm the one that's going to make sure he gets to that. So include the families in these conversations as much as you possibly can.
I feel like I've received probably some of the best care anyone could ever have. You can't make everybody happy on every situation, but I have rarely been disappointed. It seems like every step of the way you go through phases. So we went through the physical phase at first. She had to do everything physically for me. And then once I started getting more of my physical abilities back, we get into the mental limitations and the mental things that I had to start dealing with. PTSD, memory loss, all these things that affect soldiers when they're first coming out of it. So it's like every step of the way there's a phase, there's another phase, and there's another phase. And now, here we are, we're on the transition phase. We're transitioning. And once you get to that phase, then it's a little easier on you. But then you get to okay, I'm fixing to make a decision in my life. Am I going to stay in the Army or stay in the military, or am I getting out? Nobody can make that decision for you. Nobody can make that decision except for the service member. Who is it going to affect? Everybody around you. The kids, as soon as we started talking about me maybe staying in the Army, kids started freaking out. All of them was just like, you could just tell. It was like you could see their brains just whirling. Gears were turning like, oh, God, is he going to have to go back to Iraq? Is he going to do this? Is he going to have to go to all these schools? Is he going to be gone for a month, 2 months, 3 months at a time? You could see all that stuff coming back to him. And, of course, my wife, same way. We literally spent half of our marriage apart. So with all that being said, the one thing that I know that's gave me peace of mind is I knew that I could go to a counselor. I've been to counselors at high stress times, at peaks. I would either find a preacher, civilian preacher, a chaplain, or a paid professional to go and spill it. And I would go and talk to them and get it off my chest. And 90% of the time, that helped. It made a world of difference.
He's slowly beginning to do more stuff outside and tolerate the heat a little better. He'll play for a day and then rest a couple. So we're kind of learning, that's what we've got to do. If he's going to play for a day outside in the heat, then we know for the next couple of days we can't really do much, which, that gives everybody a chance to recoup. But it's limits that we've had to learn to keep him going and not getting sick.
I had to get to a point in my marriage and in my relationship with my wife where, okay, we're comfortable now. With the kids are, okay, they've accepted Dad's got limitations. Now, it doesn't always make them happy that I can't go outside and play with them like I used to, but everybody's kind of learning and accepting.
We both try to give back to the community, to give back to the military community as well as the civilian community, help bring awareness to not just people injured like Shilo physically, but the ones that are mentally injured as well.
When I'm talking to soldiers, I try to tell them, you have to look at everything that God gives you as a gift. It may not always be the gift that you want, but you have to take what you get sometimes and turn it into something else. And that's kind of what I've done. There was times when I would look in the mirror and think, did this really happen to me? Is this really me that I'm looking at? And as vivid as my dreams were when I was in my coma, I sometimes wonder, am I going to wake up and all this be gone? You know what I mean? But I've really come to terms with it because I am who I am.
The situation that we've been put in, it would have been just as easy to let it guide our life into a negative and into turmoil and all the negative things that you can imagine. But we've taken what happened to Shilo and we've turned it into a very positive thing.
Actually, I consider myself a stronger person now, a better person, because I don't take so much for granted. And I feel like I'm a better father. I feel like I'm a better role model for my family because of the things that I've pushed myself to do and accomplish. And other soldiers have that. They have it. All they have to do is tap into it and use it.
Respect the family for the situation that they're in. Never look at a spouse or a caregiver and say you understand what they're going through, because until you've been in that spot, you never can. Allow them to have that anger. Allow them to have that fear, the anxiety that comes with it, because that's part of the healing process.
Every injured service member, every injured soldier, I think that they should know that it will get better. It may not be easy. It's going to be a lot of work. But things will get better. And today, you may think this is the end, but it's not. It's just the beginning. Everywhere we go, people want to know, who we are, so we tell them, we are the Harrises, the mighty, mighty Harrises, the rough, tough Harrises, and we know how to roll,